All right. And if you want to turn on, we have closed captioning going. So if you want to turn that on, you should be able to in the Zoom controls at the bottom. And otherwise, please stay muted during the main portion. And then at the end, we'll have about 15 minutes for open Q&A. And if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll keep an eye on it. So I'm going to give a quick little introduction for about the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then I will turn it over to Kendra and the panelists. So I want to remind everyone, for those of you who haven't been to one of our panels this year yet, the goal of these panels are to connect across disciplines and sectors to learn about ongoing community resilience projects and organizations here in Idaho, find out how university researchers and students can support local efforts and information needs, and consider what are some actions that we can take moving forward to begin to build community resilience, and then actually start taking steps to do that. So I know resilience can come in many definitions, but here we're talking about the capacity of a community or region to adapt to change and thrive, despite the chronic stresses, such as access to resources or climate change, and acute shocks like flooding or wildfire that they may experience. I also wanted to include this graphic today. We think a lot about disasters, whether that's climate change or flooding or drought. And they don't happen in just that environmental context. They're also happening in the context of political, social, and economic situations in which we all live. So I think it's helpful to remember that as we're talking about water here in Idaho today and how it reaches into all of these different aspects of life. So to give you a little sense of water here in Idaho, and I'm sure Kendra can kind of add some thoughts on this maybe later, is that Idaho is very diverse in terms of the water landscapes that we have here and our water needs and the resource issues that we're faced with. So this graphic is from the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, and it's showing the hydrologic landscapes here in Idaho. So light and red colors are showing the areas that are most dry. And then as we go to those darker greens and blue colors, that's also showing areas that's more wet. And then the letters here in the key are showing permeability too of the local aquifers or areas where water is stored. So you can see that across Idaho, we have incredibly diverse hydrologic landscapes. Here in Boise, down in the bottom, in the sort of southern region in Idaho, it's much drier. We have a lot of agriculture here, and we rely on water coming from dams and snowmelt. And so we have some issues related to water quantity issues, whereas that may not be the case up in the northern part of Idaho, but maybe there's other water issues associated with maybe mining or water quality. And so the diverse nature of water here in Idaho really makes the planning and decision-making complex. And it has implications for how we think about moving forward, especially as the climate is changing. Scientists have a consensus that here in Idaho, we're going to see more precipitation happening as rain, and we're also going to see earlier snow melts. And so the impacts of this is going to vary across this region, and it's going to have implications for the decisions that we're making and the types of hazards that we might be seeing, whether that's flooding or drought. I also want to mention that there's many different players involved in water management here in Idaho. We have federal water management agencies such as the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Rec. There's tribal agencies, there's state and local agencies, and this diverse array of groups are thinking about water and are responsible for the different aspects of water management, whether that's thinking about water storage and monitoring, policy enforcement, or thinking about floodplain management. So today we have groups represented from across these different levels. So we have the Army Corps of Engineers, we have the Idaho Water Resources representative, and then we also have someone from Blaine County floodplain. So we're excited to think about in this panel, the different levels of decision-making around water management here. Before I introduce Kendra, I just want to mention that here in Idaho, we are on the traditional lands of the Shoshone-Bannock, the Shoshone-Paiute, the Coeur d'Alene, the Kootenai, and the Nez Perce tribes. They're all doing really amazing work around climate adaptation and water. And I also wanted to just show the first minute of this video. This is from a series of videos that are hosted on the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation website. This one specifically is about water, and I'm just going to show the first minute.
Via, what they call it. Yeah, Via Way, our people's river. Those are homelands that goes all the way to Columbia. Weaker Creek and all these rivers, waters, creeks, they all flow. They all go to the Snake River.
Temperature, precipitation, hydrology, and ocean chemistry, which will threaten not only the lands, resources, and economies of the tribes, but also our homelands, ceremonial sites, burial sites, and traditional cultural practices.
Let's see them.
So I'm just going to show that first minute, but I encourage you to watch the rest of it and the other videos. They're doing some really excellent work around climate adaptation and thinking about water. So now I want to introduce Dr. Kendra Kaiser, who's an assistant research professor at Boise State in the Department of Geosciences. She has a PhD from Duke University in water hydrology and biogeochemistry, and a bachelor's of science from Montana State University in soil and water science and environmental biology. So I will turn it over to Kendra.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. As Carson mentioned earlier, I am the current president of the Idaho chapter of the American Water Resources Association, and I just kind of wanted to mention that right off the bat. I'm going to put the link to our website in the chat. It's a great place to connect with water resource professionals across the state. We hold generally about monthly webinars as well. And we have a large network of folks that represent consulting companies, private, nonprofit, state agencies across the board. And if you learn anything today and you have additional questions about it, I would encourage you to email me or anyone else that's on the board about things that you would like to learn more about. And we're happy to incorporate that into any of our future planning. So with that, I'll just go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. We have Christine Hilt from Blaine County Land Use and Building Services, Brandon Hobbs from the U.S. Corps of Engineers, and Neely Miller from the Idaho Water Resources Board. And I will hand it over to Christine to introduce yourself, and then we can just go in the order that's on the screen.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for my disheveled look. I'm in the middle of my hunt week right now, so I'm in the mountains wearing camo. But I work for Blaine County. It's our jurisdiction is unincorporated Blaine County, which is incredibly vast. Our jurisdiction is from Smiley Creek up in the Sawtooth Basin, the upper Salmon River, all the way down south to Silver Creek, Cary, the Littlewood drainage. So we have 3 drainages within our jurisdiction: Littlewood, Bigwood, and Upper Salmon watershed. And so it's really vast. I am the floodplain manager. So I work to regulate all the development, inspect and permit different types of development in our floodplains. We also have riparian regulations. And so I do also code enforcement or compliance for the county, which is all zoning regulations. And so my job with the county is very vast and very broad, but I do feel after 5 years in my position that they go hand in hand. It's really, water is one of those things where you have to have some regulatory teeth if you're going to also do some education and follow through. So that's who I am, and I look forward to diving into some more of the details with all of you today.
I guess it's my turn to go. So I am Brandon Hobbs. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers Walla Walla District. As an agency, the Corps of Engineers is sort of we think of ourselves as the nation's engineers. Our organization is older than the country is, going back to the Continental Army. And we primarily focus on water resources issues when we're not doing military construction, I suppose. This can include navigation on large rivers like the Mississippi and the Columbia. It also includes flood risk reduction, water supply issues, and we are an agency that is responsible for enforcing certain parts of the Clean Water Act as well. The Walla Walla district covers the Snake River watershed from its headwaters up near Grand Teton National Park, all the way down to McNary Dam on the Columbia River. So everything above that in the Snake River watershed is in our district. And for the district, I am a project manager and outreach coordinator. I'm the coordinator of the Idaho Silver Jackets team, which is an interagency flood risk group. And I wear a lot of hats during the year, depending on if there is floods or fires or just projects to be done. Thanks.
I guess it's my turn now. My name is Neely Miller. I'm a Water Resource Planner Senior with the Idaho Department of Water Resources. The Idaho Department of Water Resources is an agency for the state of Idaho, and it's actually sort of split down the middle. There's the director of the Department of Water Resources that does takes a lot of regulatory actions, and it supports, and the part of the department that supports those efforts works on water rights, delivery of water, water administration, our resource protection portions of the agency like dam safety and stream channel protection. On the other side of the Department of Water Resources is the Idaho Water Resource Board, and they're sort of at the head, just like the director, and staff reports to both of them. I'm in a unit in the Department of Water Resources that's really solely focused on Idaho Water Resource Board programs and initiatives. And our area is statewide, the state of Idaho, and we're looking to be, the board looks to look forward, to plan for the future, to try and solve problems on the ground, either today or problems that are emerging, as opposed to the other side of the department that's looking to more regulatory action. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. It's really great to have perspectives from such a range of scope and scale that you're bringing to the conversation today. So this first question is kind of a pretty big one, but perhaps it's one where you can pick a couple of the biggest items. And we're just wondering how water management is changing in your respective organizations. So I'll just shoot it over to Brandon. I'll give you a first go at it.
Sure, thanks. So water management for us is a cooperative thing right now. The reservoirs that we operate or cooperate with the Bureau of Reclamation around the state, typically, not all of them, but a lot of them have both water supply authorities, right? So we're delivering water to irrigators and flood risk reduction authorities. And as you might imagine, these things are in direct conflict. If you want to manage floods, you keep a reservoir empty until a flood fills it up and a flood doesn't happen downstream. And likewise, if you want to deliver water supply, you keep it full and at all times as much as you can so that there's always water to deliver. We're always walking that fine line, especially in the Snake, on the Upper Snake and on the Boise River. In terms of how it's changing, we're trying to adapt as climate is changing a little bit, but all of our systems, as Carson mentioned at the beginning, are snow driven. So we can really only manage our reservoirs for both water supply and flood risk reduction based on the snow on the ground that we can see. So we're definitely looking at and thinking ahead to the changing risk profile that we'll see since our responsibility is primarily on the flood risk reduction side, that changing risk profile, if that starts to, snow runs off earlier or much more of the precipitation comes as rain. So, right now we're watching it and we're mostly in reaction mode because we're still operating under the paradigms that we have been, with the idea that we end the spring having reduced flooding and provided as much water as we possibly can. But we are starting to think ahead to what will it look like, if much more of our precipitation comes as rain. Thanks.
Yeah, I have one quick follow-up on that one, Brandon. So I know
Sure.
that down in California, many of you may be familiar that they deal with atmospheric rivers, which I believe there might be one coming this upcoming week. And
There
so
is.
they are shifting to thinking about how to incorporate those kind of rain forecasts. Is that something in the Corps of Engineers that you're able to adapt, like bring in management perspectives that are occurring in other regions in the United States?
Absolutely. We learn from other places, although a lot of Western states will tell you that we're unique because we are so snow driven. And so, in California, they're more coastal, it's a more coastal system. So when they see atmospheric rivers, they see rain. When we see atmospheric rivers in the winter, we see massive snow more often than not, although occasionally warm systems will come in and rain on top of snow. So we definitely pay attention to it. We definitely incorporate those forecasts, but in terms of operations at this point, we still have to react to what we can see on the ground, because you also have, people who say, well, it's a La Nina year, just empty the reservoirs because it's going to be a flood. And then if all those atmospheric rivers miss us, then there's no water. So we definitely pay attention and learn from our neighboring areas, but we're still, like I said, we're still working under the same paradigm that we have been.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. I'll kick it over to Christine. So just a reminder, how's water management changing in your organization?
Sure. Thank you, Kendra. Okay, so a couple of different things. So, just for everyone who's unaware, as I'm sure most of you are, we are a Dillon rule state. So local governments only have the authorities which the state grants us, which most of the public really doesn't understand in Blaine County, but we do not have any jurisdiction over water rights, water use, point of diversions, anything like that. So it really complicates our management of the water at the local level because we're looking at a few different things. The Bigwood River is what's referred to as a freestone flowing river. So there's a lot of cobble, stone, sediment, especially after fires. We have a lot of post-fire runoff, so increase of sediment load, turbidity, sand, and silts, which all change water behavior. So not only are we looking at, the use of ponds in private development, we're looking at people with vast properties in unincorporated county that tend to over-irrigate their domestic water right exemption, which is only a half an acre. So we really can't manage that component of water, but we're also trying to look at land use decisions and development in a way where we're not further confining or restricting our existing floodplains and river environments. So for example, the Bigwood River, I always talk about 3 different types of flooding in a normal runoff year or in any type of runoff year, really. Because of the nature of the watershed, we have a lot of subgrade water that flows underneath the river. And so we have groundwater that comes up and causes a lot of issues for crawl spaces and basements in houses and development that are built beyond the mapped floodplains that are really hard to identify and regulate. In addition to groundwater, we have surface water impacts. We have the FEMA floodplain maps, which are incredibly instrumental, but not always accurate. And in our atmosphere, sort of our climate in our area, the river changes a lot because the soil is so erosive and loose, and there's a lot of cobble. So the floodplain maps only do so much for us in really kind of estimating and determining where the surface water impacts are going to reach. And the last sort of issue that we deal with at the local level is a very highly erosive river system. And so we do regulate the riparian buffers. And so, over time, as houses are becoming built out, these subdivisions are getting built. Vacant land is very hard to come by these days because we just have such an influx of development. We're really starting to see the impacts from confining our river channel and our floodplains. And so our management is changing to really kind of understand what those previous land use decisions are doing to the broader community. Once you allow someone to build a house, the county will never tell you that you cannot protect it. And most of the time that means placing an incredible amount of rock riprap along your banks to halt erosion and property loss, which has downstream impacts to all of your neighbors and the entire ecosystem in general. And so our management is really just, I think we're at a crux where we're trying not to be so reactionary, and we're trying to understand how we can be more proactive and still honor development rights and previously issued approvals from past elected officials in our valley. And so there's a lot of change going on with that respect.
Thanks, Christine. That is a really great example and an awesome way to go over to Neely, because I think that it come up some here in the Boise River Valley, but it's interesting to think about how who gets to manage which component of our water resources affects how you plan and change. And so as a county, having to focus on the land use side because the state has management of the water rights. So that's a really great example. So Neely, we'll kick it over to you. How are things changing over at the Department of Water Resources?
Sure, yeah. I'll address that in terms of both sides of the agency. From the administrative perspective, which is that regulatory component, it's not changing a lot right at this moment, but I'd say over the last, say, 15 years, the shift from managing surface and groundwater separately to managing or administering them conjunctively is the big story. And I think Idaho's, or at least in portions of the state, is really leading the way on that. And that's, I think, also driven a lot of the department to react. And that's how it initially starts, is reacting to a lot of lawsuits over water calls. Because once you start to administer those ground and surface waters together, you see that there's a lot of different outcomes that occur as opposed to how they've traditionally occurred. Because you're administrating water rights that maybe have a 1970 water right as opposed to a surface water right that may be from the 1800s. So that's a big one. So where you're seeing those declining aquifers, they're having significant impacts on water rights and rivers, streams, and fish. But I think water rights is causing it's causing a lot of work for the department. I think, they've had to respond to a lot of water calls. It's caused the department to shift the way they administer water in the West. And I think we've caught up to that. And I expect the conjunctive administration to move into other basins as we move into the future. In terms of the planning side of the department, we were just beginning our effort to develop an Eastern Snake Plain comprehensive aquifer management plan about 10 years ago. And that was some significant planning to try and solve water conflicts on the Eastern Snake Plain, where you've essentially got a third of the state's GDP or goods and services produced in ag. And so there was a lot of economic development focus from the legislature. You've also got the Snake River, where you've got the spring flows into the Snake River. So you've got water quality concerns throughout the river. Again, the department only works on water quantity, not the DEQ as the water quality in Idaho, which does pose some challenges because we're only in our lane. We have to collaborate. But I guess as we move through that planning effort on the Eastern Snake Plain, I think we've shifted a lot of those efforts to other places in the state in terms of looking forward, trying to solve problems before they get as ripe as they were out there. And we've shifted to a lot more projects. That's probably the biggest change from doing minor projects 10 years ago to now. We are getting considerable funding from the legislature. We're doing projects around the state, water supply, water sustainability projects, things like developing an Eastern Snake Plain recharge program, things like the Anderson Ranch Reservoir Enlargement Raise, the Mountain Home Air Force Base Sustainable Water Project. That's to bring a sustainable water supply to the Air Force Base. East Lake Water Management Project, we're doing activities in the Bear River Basin to look at storing additional water. That's in addition to our normal programs like the Water Supply Bank, which has become fairly active, a new program for flood management grants, and then we also operate a water project loan program. And all of those are becoming much more busy, I'd say, or they're putting out a lot more funds recently as we've shifted to getting funds on the ground. I'd say a lot of that's probably due to our efforts to work with stakeholders in a lot of areas and to do a lot of outreach to the legislature to help them understand some of the challenges and to provide resources.
Thanks, Neely. That was a really great overview of a lot of the different things that are going on in the department. And I would like to reiterate his point about how forward-thinking Idaho has been in regards to conjunctive management of surface water and groundwater. It's been really amazing to learn about how we're doing that here. And so one of the things that we kind of wanted to draw on from many of the things that you all just talked about was the fact that there's a lot of coordination that goes on between agencies. So Brandon mentioned that the Corps of Engineers works with the Bureau of Reclamation. Neely mentioned that the Department of Water Resources is very focused on quantity. So the quality issues are more in coordination with the Department of Environmental Quality. And Christine, on your side, it sounds like you're working with like city planning and zoning to affect water resources management. Are there other like big hitters or organizations that either depend on what you're doing or vice versa impact how you make decisions in your organizations?
Yeah, so I would say that we actually don't work with other adjacent city officials as often as we should. We really get caught up in what's within our jurisdiction. So unfortunately, if you live in the city of Ketchum along the river and you're within city jurisdiction, your riparian setback, for example, or the floodplain regulations are going to be very different from that of the counties, which may just be the jurisdictional boundary is the next property down. And so we're trying to really understand what those walls look like along the river setting and within the watershed, and sort of tear those walls down and work more collaboratively. But in day-to-day operations, I would say for our stream channel alteration permits, we do work with the state of Idaho. So IDWR, I work with Aaron Golart, who is the head of the stream channel alteration program. I work with the Army Corps because they issue 404 permits. And I've got contacts at DEQ in Twin Falls to really kind of get some comments on water quality issues for some of the projects within the river. And then we always seek comments and collaboration with Idaho Fish and Game because we have fisheries biologists that provide comments to us on a project by project basis. And so we do actually work with quite a different broad group of organizations and people. And as you know, the local nonprofit chapters like Trout Unlimited, there's a Save Silver Creek organization for down in Silver Creek. There's a lot of different smaller groups of community constituents as well.
Thanks, Christine. I think that is such a great example of the need for folks from so many different places to come together to solve these issues because our water resources touch so many different components of our communities. So our next question is regarding resilience. So if we recall from Carson's introduction, resilience refers to the capacity of a community or region to adapt to change and thrive despite chronic stresses and acute shocks. And so we're wondering for each of you in the context of your individual organizations, what does resilience look like? And is that something that's starting to be incorporated into the way that you all are thinking about the future? And maybe I'll just start with Neely this time.
Thanks, Kendra. Great question. What does resilience look like? Well, this is something I think that I've been concerned with for a while now. And I think in the state of Idaho, as I mentioned, things have been changing over, say, the last 10 years. And In 2016, the governor asked the Idaho Water Resource Board to develop a sustainability policy for the stewardship of the water resources of the state of Idaho. So the board did that. I was actually the staff member tasked with doing that. We went out and did a lot of public comment and held statewide hearings, and all that can be found on our website. But I think the board sees the sustainability policy really as the core of where the governor and the legislature see the state going in terms of water resilience. And they've asked the board to use that policy that we developed as a way to guide our funding for statewide projects. And I'll just briefly say that, you know, the policy just says sustainability is the active stewardship of Idaho's water resources to satisfy current uses and assure future uses of this renewable resource in accordance with state law and policy. And then just briefly says that this requires taking affirmative actions to address the declining trends in the resource where those trends exist, and to establish policies that will prevent future unsustainable supplies. And then the policy goes on to lay out a bunch of strategies and milestones that could be identified for achieving those. So I think that's really the vision that the Idaho Water Resource Board sees going forward for is resilience. And in terms of how I define that, you know, I think it's being prepared to withstand stressors, those future stressors, being able to foresee some of those, and being able to thrive or be able to perform the necessary functions in the face of those. And so we're looking to have a very diversified approach. So if something really doesn't work, we have lots of other tools in our toolbox that we can lean on to help meet those challenges.
Awesome. Thanks, Neely. I hadn't heard about the sustainability plan. I dropped it into the chat in case anybody wanted to take a look at it. But that's really amazing that it has already been established, 5 years ago now.
I just would add that the state water plan is a thing that we have developed. It goes back to the first one being, I think, 1974. The latest revision was in 2016, where we added the sustainability policy. But I think the largest full revision was in 2012. And I would say that we're looking to revise that in the next few years. And so we would be trying to update it and speak to all these new institutional changes that have occurred over, say, the last 10 years. I'm sorry to jump back in there.
No, that's great. And I think, that's a great example of a place where, this question might come up later, of ways that HCRI and the research and the research community at the university or across the state might be able to contribute in a variety of ways. So I'll ask Brandon, same question. What does resilience look like for the Corps?
Sure, thanks. So for the Corps, because we are in terms of being a water management agency, we focus more on the flood risk reduction and navigation sides of things. For us in our civil works program, resilience looks like communities being more capable of withstanding flood events. A lot of people, especially in the Treasure Valley along the Boise River, seem to think that because there are 3 federal dams upstream, there is no flood risk or very limited flood risk, and that's not true at all. There's lots of communities with federal dams upstream that do provide some flood risk reduction, but there's also numerous examples of state and federal dams that did exactly what they were supposed to do, and floods still occurred. So for us, when we work with non-federal partners on civil works projects, such as the Garden City General Investigation that will be kicking off this year, and as a continuation of a previous study we did with Garden City, we look for ways to make communities resilient to flooding. And we can do it, either through structural means, like, a lot of people think of the Corps building and owning and maintaining levees. That is certainly one option on the table. But we also are starting to look a lot more at non-structural things. And so the difference between structural and non-structural is a structural solution looks to exclude water from the floodplain, like a levee, and non-structural, which is becoming a much larger focus for us, looks to make the floodplain resilient to flooding. right? So that would be, flood-proofing buildings, for example, so that they can have water against them for an extended period of time and not take any damage, right? So what we want to do is work with communities through these different techniques, I guess, to make them, more aware that flooding can happen and will happen. Water always wins, and make it so that the recovery from that is, as painless as possible. So either you just like, oh, the water went away, we clean up a little bit of stuff on the street and go back to business, or at least you have minimal damage to structures and infrastructure and all of that. So we're definitely putting a lot more focus to that now in our civil works program.
Thanks, Brandon. It's a really interesting perspective on flipping, being able to put some of the power into the community for ground up work coming from a federal agency. So that's really interesting. Christine, what are you thinking for Blaine County?
So I think that the elephant in the room here in Idaho is that people think that they own water. They have rights to it, and it's theirs to own and do with what they want with it. There's a lack of resources at the state level for regulation and enforcement. I am one person in Blaine County with a population growing extremely rapidly, like the rest of Idaho. We've got, 25,000 constituents, and I'm the only code enforcement person for zoning regulations. And I happen to be the one person that processes all of our stream channel permits. I deal with riparian violations along the rivers and the streams, and I do all the floodplain work. And so I think that in order to be resilient, we need to get ahead of, the education for everyone that lives in Idaho. So we have a lot of people, for example, moving to Idaho right now from California that have such a fear of fire, and their land use decisions right now are really poorly informed and ignorant. There's people moving to floodplains that are completely clearing out the underfloor of these riparian and cottonwood forests, thinking that they're going to be, decreasing ladder fuels and protecting their structures from fires, when in fact they're actually increasing the severity and their risk towards the flooding. And so we have a lot of conflict going on right now between what it means to be fire resilient and flood resilient, and how all of those conversations need to come together. And so I think that in order to be resilient for us at the local level, who really deal with like the public, I know that Neely and Brandon deal with a lot of other agencies, but like the people that we serve directly are the members of the public that pay the taxes for all of us to have our jobs. So I really feel like we need to start getting ahead of the education and letting people know, the water in the state of Idaho is definitely managed differently in the sense that there are water rights, but it is also a natural resource. It's not a private amenity. And so I think that we really need to do campaigns and work together to really make sure that we're consistently sending out messages that address flood mitigation, potentially address activities where, fire mitigation doesn't adversely impact our watershed and actually increase and exacerbate flooding impacts. And then also kind of really look at personal decisions for how people are using water at their own properties. And so there's a lot of different layers, and it is super complex. But I really feel like the number one thing that we need to do is to formulate a message to the public and really keep those doors open with them, because we need buy-in from the community members.
Thanks, Christine. I think that's such a valuable point and a really great charge, particularly for those of us at the university of thinking about novel ways that we can reach the community. And I'll do a quick plug. I recently met a City of Boise employee who is working on this project called Earth to Sky. It's funded through NASA, and the whole goal of it is to create a community of educators on how to educate folks about climate change. And in particular, this year it's on drought. So I'm going to just pop the link of that in the chat as well. They're doing some webinars this fall. And I think thinking about additional ways that we can do that collaboratively would be a really cool outcome of us all chatting together today. So I'm going to do one more quick question, and then hopefully we'll have a time for Carson to ask a couple of more questions. So I guess the big one I'm wondering about is, are there specific challenges that are unique to your organizations associated with how water resources and land use will continue to change in the near future? And maybe we'll go Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for that question. For sure, there are challenges to what we do. As has been pointed out by both Neely and Christine, we don't own any of the water that we touch in this state. We are a federal agency, but the state owns it. Nevertheless, we have a federal mandate to provide flood risk reduction through authorized projects. And so it occasionally becomes a point of conflict when we are releasing water to prepare for floods to arrive in our reservoir, and trying to manage floods. We also struggle a little bit with the operation of Dworshak Dam on the Clearwater River. It is primarily a flood control structure, on one of the forks of the Clearwater, but during the summer, it is used for temperature control on the Snake River, right? Because the water that reaches the lower Snake is very warm. And so what cools it off is the water released from Dworshak. And so we have to we have to be very careful about how we manage the flood season there too, to end up with as full a pool as possible, so that we can meet that requirement of the federal government to operate the navigation system on the Snake and the Columbia, and just take care of the environment. It's not that we're just about operating built things. We actually do care about the environment, and we try to do things to improve it. So yeah, we have a lot of challenges around that, just in terms of we're managing other people's water, sometimes for other people's purposes, and then we have to do it in cooperation with other agencies at the state and federal level that have yet other mandates from themselves and other organizations. So it's just a complicated puzzle to deal with.
For sure. Thanks, Brandon. Neely, I'll ask the same question, and I forgot the second half of it, which was also opportunities. So you could speak to either or both.
Sure. Well, since Brandon mentioned other agencies and how they impact, I think here one of our big challenges is we manage water. Half of our agency is administering water in priority. In most cases, we don't control the reservoirs. Those are operated by either the Corps of Engineers or the Bureau of Reclamation. And so we're sort of playing catch up, or if they do this, then we do this. And there's a lot of that in our planning models. So that's a challenge. But I have to say, I think we have some good groups around those issues where we collaborate and have regular check-ins and have developed formulas for things that need to be discussed. So I think those are great. I think dealing with climate in those conversations is going to be a challenge in terms of how do we adapt how we operate the reservoirs. I think another challenge, and this is maybe more basic and goes back to some of the things that were talked about in the intro, but I think really as an agency that manages water, the more winter rain and not as much snowpack is a big concern for us, because that mountain snowpack serves as essentially a whole nother reservoir that then empties every year slowly over the spring and into summer. Without that, there's the need to replace that storage somehow. So that's one of the reasons the board is pursuing both surface water storage and enhancing aquifer recharge groundwater storage. The extreme variability is another key thing. I think that, that those extended droughts and then the fair turn where you get lots of wet years, and being able to handle both lots of water and being able to keep the system working when you have, say, 2 to 3 dry years in a row. Those are where our challenge is. It's not the first year, it's those second and third years that really cripple the system and really challenge the partnerships and the way of doing things. The flip side of that is that there are opportunities to remake the system, and some of that has occurred over the last 10 years. You know, there were just legal battles, and what's transitioned on the Eastern Snake Plain is now they've come together and come up with settlements where they've brought in all the players, you know, even producers and cities and agricultural users. They're all at the table and making sacrifices. And if they're not meeting their goals, they're gonna adapt. But beyond that, I just throw in the common things of aging infrastructure and funding challenges. And we're hoping to utilize funding both from the feds through a lot of these infrastructure bills and the state to help sort of sock some money away for some of those big investments.
Awesome. Thanks, Neely. And Christine, I'll give it over to you, but if you don't mind making it efficient so we can get a couple of audience questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just, based on the what Liz said and the messages, I just want to say I didn't mean to offend anyone that came from California. I know that we all moved to Idaho from somewhere, whether or not it was our grandparents or whatnot, but my personal experience is that a lot of people that move to Idaho from a liberal state move here because they think that they have a lot more freedoms with respect to government regulation. Blaine County is definitely not like the rest of Idaho. So our challenges at the local level, we are the only county in the entire state that actually regulates the riparian areas of our rivers. To my knowledge, we're the only county in the entire state that actually has a stream alteration program where we require permitting prior to any disturbance. And so I think that our challenge is our lack of resources to implement our existing policies and ensure compliance with the existing regulations. We have a lack of education, as I previously stated, and our opportunities. I really feel like we need to be transferring more of the burden upon developers, people coming in to trying to make a buck. There's a big company that just came in from Las Vegas, and they are professional developers, land developers. So there's a lot of people that are looking for opportunities to capitalize on, you know, the mass exodus of people all over the country right now. And they're looking to develop the land. And I think our opportunities for water resource management at the state is to really put more burden upon these people that are trying to exploit our natural resources at the state just to make some money.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna hop in now. Thanks, Kendra. That was really great and helpful. Thanks, Christine, for that answer. And yeah, I want to make sure we leave some time we have a pretty good audience today. We've got 70 folks here. So I want to make sure you guys have a time to ask some questions. I'm going to ask one quick question before I do that, which is one of the goals of these panels is to better understand ideas or areas where Boise State students or researchers can help you with some of these problems that we've been talking about. And so if you could give like a 20-second, these are the kinds of data or information needs, that would be great. So I'll start with Neely. Oh, you're muted, Neely.
Thank you for that. I'll be efficient. I think, you know, here in the Treasure Valley, a great example that I think the department and the board are looking for involvement is community-driven water conservation efforts, anything to start those conversations. I think the board, the Idaho Water Resource Board, would welcome those conversations and perhaps even be willing to partner in some way to help with those efforts. A lot of those water conservation efforts are governed at the local level. So I think we'd be willing to partner and support those.
Great, thank you. Good job on timing. Brandon, you want to take it over?
Sure, I can think of a couple of things real quick. One would be helping us get a better understanding on how fires change the landscape, because over the last many years now, there's been fires that have impacted snowtail sites, which in turn impact our ability to understand that extra reservoir of water in the snow and the behavior thereof, right? Our statistical methods don't fully account for that at the moment. And the other one would be, as the climate changes, how to just how better to have more forward-looking abilities, right? To see as we transition from snow to rain, for example, what we'll end up with at the end of a spring, so that we can maximize water supply while still trying to minimize flood risk.
Awesome. Thank you. Christine, do you have anything to add?
I do. I'm just I typed answers to all your questions last night, so I think I found. So I think that, at the local level, and being that we're kind of the recipient of a lot of projects, if you will, in local government, I think that we really need to assess what currently exists. There's a lot of reports and assessments and data collections and things that the Army Corps did, Natural Resource Conservation Center, the list goes on and on, but there have been people collecting data on water for decades in Idaho, and most of those publications sit on a shelf. I think they need to be digitized, they need to be assessed, and we need to collect data to compare to the historical reports to really kind of understand where and how fast we're moving there. I think we need more collaboration opportunities, dedicated positions, and long-term funding mechanisms. Thank you, Neely, for the annual funding from your department. And then also we need monitoring and reporting to assess success. So we really have to follow up on these projects, and oftentimes there's money put into restoration and data collection, but then it just ends. And so I really feel like we need to start following through long-term as well to really understand what the road looks like.
Thanks, Christine. I think that's excellent. And I think there's definitely students and researchers at Boise State who'd be really excited to think about that and are already starting to think about how we assess things. So yeah, that was awesome. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. We have about 8 minutes left, so unfortunately we don't have a ton of time for questions, but let's see, looking at the chat, Greg Servine says, it would be good to know the most important thing to fund to ensure water management adapts to our climate change future. The most important thing to fund. So what kinds of funding needs do we need? What the kinds of things do we need to fund to better understand how we manage water as the climate changes? So whoever wants to take that one. Neely, looks like you're.
Yeah, I just was trying to find the mute. Just to be brief, that I think, we need really, and this may be simple, but that data, we need to have data and those long-term records. It's heartbreaking when you see some of those gauges or something taken out and you lose that long-term record. So I would think data and eliminating those interruptions in data. And then other thoughts are just, I think once we do identify solutions, sort of ways to marshal support for some of those solutions to navigate some of the issues that make it difficult to get those projects to come to fruition. So I think groups that are willing to have meaningful conversations across disciplines and be open-minded. I think groups that'll help with that political support are another thing that are needed.
Thank you. Christine or Brandon, do you have anything to add there?
I definitely agree on the data piece. We struggle sometimes in managing water, and particularly in floods when data stations go away. And when we do go to work with non-federal sponsors, small communities and other things, when we try to quantify risk or water supply or whatever it is that we might be doing, a lack of data sure makes it hard to understand the issues.
Great, thank you. Christine?
I'm sorry, I'm trying not to go through the chat, but is this the question from Greg that says, what's the most important thing to fund? Okay, so my response to that going back to education. I think that we need to, at a state level, at a regional level, and at the local level, I think that we need to do a lot more education and really start embracing collaboration, because from Neely, Brandon, and I all talking, it's like, oh, well, they have jurisdictions over the dams, but we have jurisdictions over this. And then, you know, USGS has the snow-till sites, but then these people have the river gauges, but then FEMA does the mapping. And so, I mean, we could get lost in bureaucracy, but I think that together and collectively, we really need to start an educational campaign in the entire state of Idaho that trickles down to people's televisions in their living rooms. I think that we need to put a lot more money in education. It will save us resources when it comes to regulation and enforcement on the other side of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Okay, let's see. We have a comment from Jeff Fairday. Let's see. The Water Board Sustainability Plan includes the proposal to enhance water transfer mechanisms in Idaho law, policy, and regulations to allow future economic opportunities to use existing water supplies while protecting existing issues. So this question is for Neely. What is IDWR doing to promote transfers to new uses of the vast amounts of unneeded water rights that are currently being diverted to areas that were once irrigated agricultural lands, but are now urbanized for residential and commercial uses?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's sheds light on something that is happening out there that a lot of folks are not aware of. Is there's a lot of transition around the state from ag to urban, and it's being guided in different ways because a lot of those planning decisions are guided at the local or the county level. Here in Boise and in the Treasure Valley, a lot of the ag land that has transitioned has transitioned to commercial or residential, and a lot of that land has some impervious surfaces on it, so there's less land to irrigate. And so I think that's kind of the point that this question is getting at, is what's the state or the department doing to address that. I think one thing we're doing is looking at that and trying to assess in terms of how much water is still being used on those lands. And you get mixed messages on that. There's a lot of disagreement. In one hand, you hear people say that if they should be using half as much water, but in a lot of those conversations, you get as many people that believe just as strongly that they're using as much water. And it's a tough question, and it's emerging in different places in different ways. And I think it's something that the department's going to have to grapple with at some point going forward. And I see that there could be a way for some of that water to be reallocated. I understand the idea. I think as the water situation here in the valley becomes a little tighter, or becomes administered, I think some of those things will become more ripe to address. But at this point, those are sort of working themselves out. We just developed a model here in the Treasure Valley, and we're using metric data to then look at some of that transition lands. And I think we'll have more to come. And I would encourage folks to attend our upcoming meetings on the Treasure Valley groundwater flow model. I think we have them quarterly now. And that's a topic that'll probably get addressed at some point through that.
Thanks, Neely. All right, well, we have about 2 minutes left. So I want to see if any of the panelists, if you have any last sort of thoughts on water here in Idaho that you want people here at Boise State or the rest of our community to know about. And also if you want to put any contact information in the chat, if people are interested in getting in touch with you later, that would be great. So do you have any final comments? Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I just want to really reiterate the importance as we're moving forward, as, I think Brandon touched on earlier. water is so complex, and it's really kind of challenging sometimes to differentiate between our drinking water and the water which we use around our property, and then flood impacts and snow impacts, and how the actual precipitation is changing coming from the sky and landing on the landscape. And so the final thought that I would leave everyone with, that I think kind of touches on everyone, as we move forward through climate change and a changing, landscape, I think it's really important to remember to keep development out of these really sensitive ecosystems. So as water becomes more scarce, we're seeing a lot of trout kill, a lot of, aquatic species population impacts. And so we're forgetting the impacts of the water because the water is becoming more scarce. But our runoff season is also becoming more compounded. So the water that we do have in the form of flooding is becoming a lot more dangerous. And so I just really want to put out to everyone that if you have any type of interaction with how development is spreading and changing in the entire state, do what you can to protect these rivers and these riparian areas, because they impact so much more than their immediate location.
Thank you, Christine. Brandon, any final thoughts?
I guess just real quick to actually kind of build on what Christine said just a little bit. The federal water managers, we do what we can with resources that are not ours. We try to deliver flood risk reduction and water supply primarily for agriculture and for other purposes as well, including recreation. But in terms of looking forward and trying to be resilient into this changing future, my one thing would be, let's not assume that dams solve everything on water supply or floods, and definitely think both about water conservation, because it is going to be a more scarce resource with different timing than we're used to. And also, stay out of floodplains, because one of these days you're going to get wet and it won't be our fault, even though everyone will blame us. So I guess that's what I have as as my parting thoughts.
Thank you, Brandon. All right, Neely, final thoughts. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
I'll keep it brief. I would echo what my fellow participants just said, and I don't have any closing thoughts. It's just, I think conversations and collaborations and talking to people that are from different interest groups. If you have environmental concerns, talk to some folks that are in a recreational community or in the ag community, just so you can understand their perspective. Because we all have to work together to solve these problems. And if we stay in our own lanes and assume we're right and everyone has to bend to our will, then a lot of times we don't get anything done. So that would be my closing thoughts.
Thank you, Neely. Those are all really great closing thoughts from all of you. Super valuable. I think, as we heard today, it's a really complex issue, and we're not going to solve all the answers during an hour-long webinar. So, but hopefully this webinar gave people a chance to think about some of these issues and think about who they might connect with on these issues going forward. So thank you so much to all the panelists who joined us today. Thank you, Kendra, for facilitating. And next month, our topic will be on resilience infrastructure. So check our website out, and thanks for all being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to all the participants too.